long story short, what I'm saying is if you treat everybody and you monitor nobody, you're getting nowhere. You're just raising potential susceptible stock. And if one of those colonies are resistant stock, you treating them is not going to change their genetics. If you were to change your program to begin looking for mite-resistant stock, how would that look for you? Where would you start? James Lee with James Lee's Bees. I am checking on some bee colonies that had some significant mite counts last September. We're talking 30, one was around 50, the other one might have been approaching 60. And kind of in a scenario where there's either a Hail Mary or you give up. And in most instances, you could condemn me for neglect. However, when you're breeding resistant honeybees, when you're trying to evaluate stock, sometimes treatment's not the first option. And you can't exactly evaluate mite resistance if you don't have any mites. So if you want to raise mite-resistant honeybees, can you raise them without any mites? Because if you have a strict treatment regimen and you want to improve your stock, you're going to have to skirt some boundaries and maybe even break some rules. If you were to change your program to begin looking for mite-resistant stock, how would that look for you? Where would you start? Glad I wore my bee suit. Wasn't going to. But they look like they've got plenty of spores in this upper box. It's a fairly large cluster. It's getting ready to get pretty warm, or cold, I'm sorry. And I can hap this with one hand pretty easily. So I'm gonna put a sugar brick right in here. I didn't really do a great job with these sugar bricks, but the batches after, I learned from my mistakes. See, I already did that one. Wanted to take a peek and see how these ones were doing because the mite count on this one was really high. And that gap right there is from the wood being warped from moisture, having the reflectix on there. But once I put the cinder block on top, smush that down, I can blue tape that seam, and that will remediate some heat loss, but not a lot. Hopefully it's not too much, but historically it's been just fine. So for example, in one of my furthest out yards, I moved bees here in the fall after losing one of my other yards due to a sale of the lot. And the general rule of thumb is if you do a mite wash and the colonies in a yard are sharing a yard with that, let's say, high mite wash colony, you should treat everybody because it's likely that every colony will have varroa infestations that are above manageable levels for the bees or for you and your economic injury threshold if you have one that you've determined. But if you're not monitoring the other colonies, you don't really know if they are sharing that mite load. So you are prophylactically treating those colonies based on one colony's failure. And in a yard of, let's say, 10 colonies, and one of them only washes above that safe zone, for me, let's say 5%, the other colonies may not wash that 5%, and then I treat them, and I'm not able to determine if any of those colonies are resistant stock. So it's not about you're a treater, you're not a treater, good versus bad with treating. It's about how do you determine moving the genetics forward in your apiary in a positive way if you're not able to understand or know what's going on with each colony. So long story short, what I'm saying is if you treat everybody and you monitor nobody, you're getting nowhere. You're just raising potential susceptible stock. And if one of those colonies are resistant stock, you treating them is not going to change their genetics. Actually, to the contrary, you'll be breeding from them or rearing more queens and splits from them unbeknown to you. But wouldn't you rather know? Wouldn't you rather add those genetics to your apiary in larger quantity and continue to raise more resilient stock as a result? So kind of to my point, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 colonies in this yard so far. And out of these 8 colonies, only one of them, and this is just today actually, again, it's December 28th, this is receiving an oxalic acid vaporization. One of the final treatments on this colony, because back in summer, I did a Harbo assay, and they failed the Harbo assay and subsequently failed mite washing below my acceptable threshold. So they received a treatment, and this is a follow-up cleanup treatment. This is mite-resistant stock, mite-resistant stock, mite-resistant stock, mite-resistant stock, mite-resistant stock, mite-resistant stock, mite-resistant stock. So one out of the rest of them requires treatment intervention. Now, does that mean that the other colonies are safe from fatality? Absolutely not. That colony died. That colony died. Mite washes on those colonies, 2% and lower. That's also mite-resistant stock. So a myriad of other issues may have caused problems in those colonies. It could be queen failure. Not quite sure, but they died during the winter. They were alive on November 16th, and so were they, and they had plenty of food. This one was actually shrunk down to size because I stole the stores and gave it to this box over here. So again, the point I'm trying to make is colony death isn't always varroa mites. Most of the time it is. We won't lie about that. But in principle, these colonies in this yard, if I would have treated all of them based on the result of one, I would not be able to determine what their capacity for resistance is next season. Nor would I know who my best candidates are to make more queens and splits for my customers from. So that's why I keep asking the question, right? I keep saying, how many colonies do you have to have in order to be treatment-free and not treat? How many of those colonies have to be treatment-free in order to be a treatment-free beekeeper? And then how many of your colonies have to be treated to be a treating beekeeper? You know, I don't know. It's fun to ask the question because it's one of those, if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody around to hear it, does it make a sound kind of questions? Of course it makes a sound. If you treat your colonies, of course you're a treating beekeeper. If you don't treat your colonies, of course you're a treatment-free beekeeper. You didn't treat the colony. But in all reality, if you're doing both, you're just a beekeeper, right? But are we beekeepers that are moving the needle forward for our stock? Are we moving the species in a direction that's going to benefit individuals and the industry? It can't just be a few of us. It has to be a lot of us. dare I say every one of us, working together to look for these little pockets of positive genetics in every single apiary. I don't buy into the idea that if you're a small beekeeper, you can't breed. I'm not fond of saying that there's a big difference between breeding and just queen rearing. I mean, if you're selecting stock and you're not even grafting queens, you're technically breeding. You just may not know what it is you're breeding or selecting for, but you're selecting for something. You're breeding something. So we need to know what it is so we can share it with others, and that we can increase the propensity of our bees to survive despite us. Because when your treatments are unavailable and your bees can't survive without you or your treatments, that's not going to help anyone. It's definitely not going to help the industry. So I am in my nuke yard, which was a replacement where bees had to be moved because my prior mating yard had been sold, I guess you could say. You can't complain about a free lease. And going through colonies and checking weights, making sure everybody still had good weight as we get ready for a pretty significant cold snap here in southeast Michigan. And I wanted to verify survivors. About a month ago, there was about 10 losses in this yard, and it stands around. There's still about 10. Hate to show you all the good stuff all the time and never talk about the bad stuff. I don't believe that we should wave our overwintering successes around like some sort of big fish story as if it is some sort of badge of honor, because sometimes when your bees survive, it's because of you and not because of the bees. And I'm not so sure that I'm really confident in proceeding forward with my beekeeping with bees that struggle to stay alive without a lot of support. So it's kind of a catch-22. This yard is not a treated yard. These are bees that are put under the stress test of surviving on their own, having been grafted from potential breeder stock. And sometimes the mating doesn't go the way you wish or hope it would go. But at the end of the day, the ones that survive, those are going to be the ones that you want to continue to breed and raise future queens from. So obviously one of the benefits is I don't have to put sugar cakes on some of these. I could just go ahead and steal from the dead and give to the living. And this is a stack of dead outs that I got going here. Like I said, there's about 10 in this yard that didn't make it a few weeks ago. I did try to experiment a little bit with one of these colonies over here. Actually, both these colonies are just queens that didn't find a home. So I added a super to each one a few weeks ago. Make sure they had enough food. This is the only one left. That one didn't make it. So pick up the bones and move forward with our beekeeping in the spring. Feel good about the next week or two when we start getting much colder weather here through January. But you know, that's it. That's beekeeping. You have to take your losses on the chin, and you have to breed from the survivors. And just because you have losses doesn't mean you're an epic failure. And just because others might have a larger survival percentage than you doesn't necessarily mean that they have bees you want either. Now they might, and hopefully they do, but in the grand scheme of things, make the selection of your bees that works for you in your program and keep raising winners from the winners. That's how we're going to improve our overall species breeding schemes in the United States and in Michigan. All right, okay, bye.